I think the residents of Anacostia have just every right in the world to have a waterfront that's as nice as the residents of Georgetown. The public should care about architecture and design because that's the world in which we live. It makes the world a little bit more functional. And if we really do our jobs right, it can bring together people who otherwise wouldn't normally cross paths. I think at its foundation, the 11th Street Bridge Park is about creating a civic space that can metaphorically and physically bridge two long divided neighborhoods. But it sends a powerful message that the nonprofit that's been working with the city building bridges across the river has been already serving the community for the last 20 years. The work really began by making sure that we were putting decision-making power back into the hands of local residents, many of which now it's been my great honor to call my friends after this 10 years of working on this project, have driven every single element of the park, every programming element, even to selecting the design team. We know what happens when we invest, particularly in Black and brown communities, without a level of intentionality. We wanted to make sure that the tens of thousands of residents who helped shape this project from the beginning can be the ones that benefit from it. What I've learned about gentrification working on this project is that gentrification displacement is not inevitable. It's maintaining our promise, it's maintaining our commitment to the local residents of who this park is for. I would like to say to both the foundation and the chapter, just an enormous gratitude. It is aspirational. To reconnect to these communities that have been divided for generations in this space that local residents can collectively own, right? In a space that will be beautiful, that will be exhilarating, that will be a place for active and passive recreation, but for the residents, for local residents east and west of the river, keeps me going every day. My name is Scott Kratz, and I am the Senior Vice President of Building Bridges Across the River. So some of the strategies in our Equitable Development Plan include our housing strategies. So that includes standing up the Douglas Community Land Trust that now has over 250 units of permanently affordable housing that's owned by local residents, owned by the community. 6 years ago, we started the Ward 8 Homebuyers Club for residents east of the river, that 75% of those residents are renters at greatest risk of displacement. So in partnership with the local affordable nonprofit MANA, we've been running the Ward 8 Homebuyers Club that's now seen 104 Ward 8 renters become homeowners, building generational wealth for their families. If we're spending $90 million to build this park, it's really critical to make sure that as much of those dollars go back into the local community as possible. But to do that, we need to make sure that local residents have the skill set and capacity to apply for and succeed at these jobs. So we just graduated our 25th construction training program, right? Years in advance we won't break ground until next year. We've invested several $1 million in Black-owned businesses east of the river, because if the park is bringing in 800,000 to 1.2 million visitors a year, we want to make sure that as visitors come to the park, that they're also going into the nearby neighborhoods and residents, and it's benefiting them. So to date, we've been able to secure over $85 million to implement these equitable development strategies that nearly matches the same amount of money as it's going to cost to build the park, right? Years in advance of this opening. So by the time the park opens in 2025, we'll be investing in these equitable development strategies for 9 years, right? And again, yeah, this has become so much more than a park. When I started this project thinking transforming an abandoned freeway over a navigable river channel in the nation's capital was a complicated enough task, right? Now it's like, well, and then stop gentrification and displacement while you're at it. But I think as the aperture for this project has widened, it's made it so fascinating. I have learned so much. The learning curve, what did I know from a community land trust like 7 years ago, right? I'm not an expert by any means, but understanding and learning from our colleagues around the country, right? To ensure that we're not all making the same mistakes again and again and again across the country is incredibly exhilarating. And then paying it forward, making sure that we're now advising almost a dozen similar projects around the country, right? That can learn from our process, can learn from this model, and really export it, which we're working now in similar transformed infrastructure into parks in Los Angeles and Buffalo, Grand Rapids, Dallas, San Francisco, is just really exciting. But I think the thing that really gets me, what gets me excited when I wake up in the morning, I remember a moment early on in this project where I was having a conversation with Harriet Trugoning, the former DC Office of Planning Director, and I said, Harriet, the one thing that could kill this project. And she said, one thing? There's 100 things that could kill this project. I was like, I know, but I just need to focus on that one thing right now, and I'll get to the rest of the 99 when we get there. And we're not quite up to 99, but we've been through a lot. I think the most challenging issue has been the metaphorically bridging the huge trust gap that exists in the communities east of the river, and justifiable trust gap, right? And let's just call it out. I'm a white guy from Capitol Hill. I call DC home. This is my home, but I was not born here. I'm not native. And So to have another white guy come into a community and say, you know what your neighborhood need, right, is people are skeptical, and rightfully so, right? But we're now, it's really interesting. There was a recent article in the Washington Post, all about the park and our progress, and we're on the cusp of breaking ground and raising all this money, and that's great. And in the comment section, of course, there's the snarky comments that were there that we don't really respond to. But you know who responded to them? The neighbors, the local residents that's been with this project for the last 10 years. And that was incredibly gratifying, right? Because that was a manifestation that this is the community, the local residents have ownership, and it's a sense of like, well, they better build this park because I've been on this journey from the beginning, right? So I think bridging that trust gap, and I think we've done a good job, has been both the most challenging and yet most rewarding task throughout this journey. Right? I think there gets to be this deep cynicism of, well, we invest in an underinvested neighborhood, and what are you going to do? The people who've lived there for a long time are going to move out, and that is just an inevitable action. And I reject that. I wholly reject that. Every day I step outside my house, I'm walking my dog in my neighborhood, I'm surrounded by it. And I'm surrounded by the decisions that often others have made to create this built environment that most of the time people don't even give a second thought to, right? But it makes our world a little more beautiful. My advice would be to continue doing some of the great work that you're already doing, right? The engaging with some of the youngest experiencers of the built environment in the schools, right? To better communicate the power of architecture and design, I would first suggest to the foundation to continue doing the amazing work that you're doing. I think the work of bringing the importance of design, the importance of the built environment to our youngest audiences, I think is really critically important. I'd also suggest that one might push the boundaries a little bit more, and to demystify the process of creating neighborhoods, of creating buildings, and ensuring that local residents have the pathway in to design their own neighborhoods, to see, to invest in their own neighborhoods is critical. Oftentimes we see the community gets involved when a crane is going up, but we know when the crane's gone up, most of those decisions were already made, right? So how do we demystify the planning process? How do we demystify the design process and understand and communicate to the community, here's the points of opportunity where you can influence that design, and ultimately then they'll have more ownership, care more about the subject and care more about their neighborhoods and their city. I would like to say to the foundation and the chapter, right, is that right? Okay. This is when I first heard the news that I was selected for this, for the Glenn Brown Award, I took a look to see the past recipients. Wow. It has inspired me to continue to do this work, to hopefully walk in the footsteps of these amazing leaders, whose impact continues to resonate to this day. And if I could ever play a small role in some of the leaders who've gone before me, My advice to the foundation and the chapter would be, one, keep doing the amazing work that you're doing, with inspiring the youngest participants in design in our schools, in the amazing exhibitions and public programs that you're doing. But two, I would suggest that there is room to do even more. And I think particularly to share with the residents here in the District of Columbia of what is their relationship to the built environment. How do you demystify architecture? How do you demystify landscape architecture, the planning process, and where local residents can help shape the neighborhoods themselves that they live in, because that will have a greater appreciation of the field, perhaps even inspire the next sort of architects or certainly the next clients. The only other thing I would say, and maybe this is from me, maybe this isn't some of the information, but as you're talking about the 11th Street Bridge Park, an important element is to frame this as a project of our larger nonprofit, Building Bridges Across the River, because I think it's really important that the nonprofit that's working with the city on this has been serving the east of the river community for the last 20 years, right? And we're trying to do a much better job of having a oneness, right? Of it's not just the Bridge Park doing its own thing, because at the end of the day, like the Bridge Park or the Building Bridges Across the River is going to run this park after it's open, so making sure that the two are connected is really important. And otherwise, if there's a trustee that's in the audience that just hears Bridge Park, Bridge Park, Bridge Park, I will hear about it the next day. So yeah, so that's good.
No, we'll be careful about that as we put this together. Okay.
So one thing that's really important to mention is that, and I think this really sends a powerful message, is that the nonprofit that's been driving this work from the beginning, Building Bridges Across the River, has been serving the community for the last nearly 20 years east of the river. And it's been really remarkable when you're talking to local residents and well, actually, can I start over again? Okay. One thing that's really important to mention is that the nonprofit that's been behind the 11th Street Bridge Park from the beginning, we run the ARC, 203,000 square foot campus east of the river. And after the park opens, Building Bridges Across the River will be running this park for the next 75 to 100 years, well past how long we're going to be on this planet. So we started well in advance of the park opening, going back to the community, which is what we do from the beginning, and say, where are some strategies that we can put in place to ensure that the same residents who drove the programming, that selected the design team, can be the ones that benefit from it. I think if you think if you're willing to make investments in the nearby neighborhoods, if you're willing to take the time and the effort, it does not need to be inevitable. And the answer is not to invest. The answer is making sure that you're taking enough time and putting in the investment to make sure that the community is driving this at every step of the way, and that you're thinking beyond the confines of whatever project it is, in our case, a park. But it became clear that while investing in this park and the bricks and mortar of this civic space has been at the heart of this project, this has become so much more. It's become investing in the local neighborhoods, the residents, the communities on either side of the river, to make sure that we answer a very simple question that has a complicated answer of who is this for and who benefits. So we had over 200 meetings before we engaged the first architect or landscape architect or even any engineer for this project. That's where it's been really important to invest in this incredibly early. And what does that have to do with building a park? Kind of everything, right? Because it's we've seen it happen across the United States. And for us, it was really critical to make sure that we were investing early, intentionally, and with the community at the center of all of our work, well in advance of opening up the park. So often, sometimes projects in other parts of the country are so focused on building the bricks and mortar of the thing, of the investment, that then you open it and sometimes there's unintended consequences. And we wanted to make sure that didn't happen. So that the manifested itself into what we call our Equitable Development Plan. That's the sort of secret sauce of this larger work. And that includes things that might on the surface have nothing to do with building a park. It has to do with starting a community land trust. We've stood up the Douglas Community Land Trust that now has over 250 units of permanently affordable housing. We've been running for the last 6 years Ward 8 Homebuyers Club, because east of the river, 75% of the residents there are renters at greatest risk of displacement. And we know that, at least in this country, owning a home is one of the greatest opportunities for building intergenerational family wealth. So we started all of this equitable development is really critical to answer that question of who it's for, but to realize a civic space, to realize a space that can help reconnect these long divided communities, one of which I live in, right? I live in by Barracks Row, to